Sudan has gone through at least 2 coup attempts every decade since the 1960s. In the past 10 days, the Sudanese military and rapid support forces have been battling in the capital Khartoum over control of the country. After 3 ceasefires crumbled, both sides agreed to a 72-hour truce. In the first 10 days of the 2023 attacks, over 420 civilians have been killed and thousands have been injured. Shelter-in-place orders have been given as civilians run out of food and water. So why do coups like this keep happening, and how does it impact the more than 40 million people who live in Sudan? It began with foreign intervention. This is what Kim Searcy from Loyola University Chicago told us last year.
It didn't happen out of a vacuum. You have the Sudan, it's plagued by a number of civil wars throughout the time, from its time of its independence. You will have a lack of unity. You have different superpowers that are getting involved.
The British colonized Sudan at the turn of the 20th century, sharing colonial control with Egypt. In the north, Britain replaced the political leaders and developed a government-run Islamic school system. And in the south, power was shared between hundreds of different tribal leaders, and Christian missionaries run the education system. This divisive tactic created socio-economic tensions throughout Sudan that still continue today. In 1956, Sudan became an independent nation. But because of its geographic location, superpowers stoked internal conflicts within the country to fuel their international interests. During the Cold War, the U.S. provided the Sudanese governments with nearly $1 billion in arms. And today, Sudan is one of Russia's biggest weapons markets on the African continent. The country went through 2 civil wars just 11 years apart. The Second Civil War, which ended in 2005, displaced over 4 million people and killed around 2 million. Despite the U.S. providing over $1 billion worth of weapons to Sudan, it labeled the country a state sponsor of terrorism in 1993. The U.S. placed 20-year sanctions on Sudan, which impacted its access to healthcare. The U.S. even bombed a pharmaceutical factory based on false claims that it was producing chemical weapons for Al-Qaeda. Extreme political and economic instability has continued throughout Sudan. Rising food and fuel prices led to massive protests in 2019. The military stepped in and overthrew Omar al-Bashir after 30 years in power. Civilian leaders and military heads initially agreed to co-govern the country until a democratic election could take place in 2023. However, the pandemic made things even harder, and protesters again took to the streets, calling for military reform. The military once again took over and dissolved the transitional governments with another coup in 2021. When the most recent fighting erupted, humanitarian efforts came to a halt. Nearly 16 million people in Sudan are reliant on aid to survive.